this is fun. We're going to play 2 clips from Piers Morgan today. Let's play the first one, which is not as fun, although it's encouraging, where even Piers Morgan, who has been pretty staunch supporter of Israel and a denier of like what's been going on there. He has Mehdi Hassan on, and who's this other guy on there? Who's this other person on there? I'm not sure who this third person is, but here's Mehdi and Piers Morgan.
Common ground about what. Listen, you and I have talked about this war in Gaza for ever since it started, this phase of the 75-year conflict. And I have resisted going as far as you have done in your criticism of the Israeli government. I resist no more. I think we've reached common ground about what we view is happening and has been happening through this period of this blockade, which frankly is just starvation of the people there, including so many innocent young women and children. And I think that the incessant bombing and killing, and we don't know how many civilians have been killed, but it is on a daily basis. It looks like hundreds of people every day, with no apparent attempt, it seems to me, to have any real plan for how this ends or what happens when it ends, other than if you look at what Smodrich has been saying, probably the most right-wing member of a very right-wing government, he is talking in a genocidal language about kicking all the Palestinians out. So I think you and I have reached a place in the last few weeks where we are in agreement. But my question for you, Mehdi, is how does this end?
I don't know the answer to that question, Piers, and I'm glad we're in agreement. I wish we weren't. Actually, I wish I had been wrong and you were right. I wish that a year ago when I said on your show, you said, well, if it's not about the hostages, what's it about? And I said, it's about depopulating Gaza. It's about conquering Gaza. I wish I'd been wrong. But as you said, Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister in the Israeli government, said this week, we are there to conquer, cleanse, and remain. Those are his words. We are disassembling Gaza, he said. We are leaving it as piles of rubble. He says, we're doing something that no one's done in the world before. He bragged out loud, and he said, yes, the Gazans will have to leave. So all of those things are stuff some of us were saying last year. I wish we hadn't been vindicated in this horrific way. The killing is ongoing. The starvation is ongoing. And look, I do hope that a dam is bursting. You mentioned the genocide word. Shmuel Lederman, who is an Israeli researcher of genocide, spent much of 2024 saying it's not a genocide, it's not a genocide. He was interviewed by a Dutch newspaper last week. He said, I've changed my position. It is a genocide. He said, in my field, there's a consensus among genocide scholars that it's a genocide. In fact, that Dutch newspaper interviewed 7 leading scholars of genocide. Every single one said, we think what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. In fact, this week, Piers, you have an Israeli former general, Yair Golan, saying a sane country does not attack civilians, does not kill babies as a hobby, and does not expel civilian populations. That is Yair Golan, the former deputy chief of the Israeli military, prominent Israeli politician. He was a hero on October the 7th, fought Hamas himself on October the 7th. This is what he said this week.
It's almost distracting to watch that guy sitting next to him. John Spencer apparently is a retired U.S. Army officer. Just sort of smirk. Like,
because he knows he can't actually say anything to what Mehdi's saying.
I mean, it's so obvious now, and I imagine also Piers Morgan is starting to read the polls and realizing that increasingly Israel is losing support across the political spectrum in this country. And certainly, I would imagine, in the UK as well. And of course it is. It's like we're so past the date where it becomes clear that what the agenda is.
I think the starvation stuff has really made, like, people are asking what feels different now. Why is Europe being more, I guess, harsh in their tone? And I think it's because where, people that get ripped apart by bombs, you can maybe say, oh, this is a one-time mistake, even though it happens month after month. But you see starving kids, and it's like, this is clearly intentional.
And also, you can kid yourself that there's actually some type of ongoing war going on. If somebody's dropping bombs, there must be a war. They must be there must be like, and just the idea that like somehow like, you know, Hamas is hiding underneath the tent or whatever it is. They have, you know, like all the pretense is gone now. All the pretense is gone. And it was always pretense. It was quite obvious. It's also fascinating to me. And I think you're right about the starving children. I mean, this is, it's deliberate and it's obvious. And you've got people like, you know, Cindy McCain coming out and saying Hamas has nothing to do with this. But it's also interesting to me that like Morgan put it in the context of this phase of the 75 or 6 year fight, because the language about this whole thing started on October 7th. I think people also like realizing like, no, it didn't. It didn't.
There's also no more Democratic president in the White House who's sort of giving cover to Israel and Netanyahu, right? Like all these well-intentioned liberals, quote unquote, who were sort of holding their fire or reserving their judgment because Joe Biden and Harris, for that matter, were vouching for Israel, and that's gone. And the current president isn't even really vouching for Israel.
Well, that I think is, I think the first part is true, but we're 6 months into it now, and I think what is really clear is that even Trump, who has essentially, I think there's a broad awareness that Trump is going to do whatever essentially Israel wants within some context. Like he is going to allow them to annex the West Bank. He is, he promised Miriam Adelson, and we've already seen what happens when he promises her stuff. He delivers for her. And I think he's probably going to allow, sign off on Israel occupying big swaths of Gaza. But even when he's motivated by pleasing the UAE or Saudi Arabia, because it's undoubtedly going to put dollars in his pocket, he can't influence Netanyahu. And I think there was people who saw them aligned, and that he would be able to at least, sort of like do it, right? I mean, everybody gave him credit, like for the ceasefire was because he was going over there. And I think it's quite clear that like they're just biding their time. I mean, this has been the strategy of Israel for decades. Facts on the ground is what they called it 25 years ago. We're putting facts on the ground in the West Bank. We're building settlements. And the idea being like, eventually it's just, they're going to be there. And rolling it back is going to be too big of a job. Nobody's going to be able, nobody's going to expect us to do that. It's one thing we can roll up settlements in the Sinai, but add 20 years to these settlements in the West Bank, add 30 years, bring in a bunch of immigrants from former Soviet Union. Then, the facts on the ground, well, it just is what it is. And I think that's what they're basically doing in Gaza. They're just going to keep doing what they're doing. We'll let 6 aid trucks in a day. It'll let a little air out of the tires, but we're still rolling down the road, as it were. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.